Well, hello, this is Mace Hoff, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Medical Sales Guru podcast and the Medical Sales channel on YouTube. Now, today I'm doing something that I don't often do. I'm going to be interviewing another person, but the person I'm interviewing is truly special. You know, in today's world, in our economy, we always hear the word thought leader, and so many people label themselves as thought leaders. And they're really not. They're just saying the same old thing. But today, I'm going to be interviewing someone who I truly consider to be a thought leader, because thought leaders prove themselves not just by telling you what they think, but by also taking action and changing the world in some way. And my guest today is Steve Benson. Steve is the CEO and founder of Badger Maps, the #1 app in the App Store for outside salespeople to upgrade existing CRMs with mapping, routing, and scheduling. And Steve, after he received his MBA from Stanford, he joined Google, where he became Google Enterprise's top sales executive globally in 2009. He also hosts the Outside Sales Talk, a podcast specifically for outside salespeople, and is president of the Sales Hall of Fame. And I just want to say, with respect to Badger Maps, I've been recommending and an advocate of Badger apps for many, many years. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit today. But Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here, Mace.
Well, it is my pleasure. So let's jump right into this. Two sales guys talking. We've all been hearing on the news for months that everything is gloom and doom. Let's start out on a positive note, if there is one, and I'll leave that up to you, your opinion on this. But is there any good news for salespeople right now? Are there any silver linings to selling during a crisis or in a bad economy?
Well, honestly, there's not a lot. A bad economy is just basically all bad in general. But I guess if there is any good news for salespeople in particular that I can think of, I guess the biggest thing would be that now people are picking up the phone. So prospects are more likely to be approachable. Decision makers are maybe who would have been just impossible to reach this time last year are now willing to pick up their phones if you call them. And why? They're working at home, they're quarantined, they're bored, they're lonely. They're forced to look at solutions to make their business more efficient, more revenue, cut cost. So they're willing to talk and engage. And I guess if your customers are doctors, their revenue is probably down, and they're willing to take a look at new ideas, basically. And so if you can run some plays that are working around picking up the phone and getting people to and actually engaging with people who are actually answering, that could be a great way to shift some of your time and energy towards lead generation right now. And also you can think about, as an organization, as a company, you can think about shifting more of your resources into lead generation, shifting more of your resources into meaning, like, if you had a deployment team, maybe they're not deploying nearly as much right now, but you could shift some of the deployment team resources into generating more leads.
Absolutely. I've been finding that out as well. It's a great time for reaching out, prospecting, and staying in touch with your folks. So you have a lot of expertise in field sales, and you run a software company for field salespeople, Badger Maps. Field salespeople are under a ton of pressure right now since many people can't go into the field. So how do we bridge the gap of having limited face-to-face visits, or even no face-to-face visits, which is really the case in healthcare, especially if a company's sales strategy is based around the customer experiencing a product in person, and the product is either difficult or it can't really be demoed via video or other methods? What's the strategy for that, Steve?
Yeah, great question. I guess I'm in a unique position because I can see data on 5,000 companies that use Badger Maps for their field sales teams, and I can see what they're doing. I can see what their activities are. So we're currently seeing about a 20% decline in customer meetings across the board than we were seeing before COVID. And it's not perfectly distributed, right? It's unevenly distributed. Meaning
A
some
quick
industry.
question. A quick question. When you say a decline of customer meetings, is that both live and virtual, or are you just talking about live?
Well, we can see live or virtual because people using Badger will do check-ins for either. So if you're doing a live meeting, you'll do a check-in, but also if you're doing a virtual meeting. So we're seeing a 20% decline in meetings, including live and virtual. So you can assume that's translating into a decline in economic activity of some percentage as well, right?
Right.
Now it's unevenly distributed, meaning it's in some industries things are just ground to an absolute halt, and they've laid off their teams, and maybe the company's bankrupt. But then in other cases, a lot of companies are still in business. They're doing just great, or maybe they're doing okay. It's kind of a spectrum, right? But in a lot of cases where sales teams are still employed, everything's still up and running. It's kind of business as usual. And a lot of industries are essential, right? Especially like a lot of your listeners are in med device sales, right? So this is essential stuff, right? So a sales rep that was selling exercise equipment to gym or beer to bars, they're out of business right now. But if you're a medical device rep, you're selling stuff to medical device. You're still selling medical devices to doctors the same way as before, right? So,
well, not the same way as before, because a lot of medical reps don't have access, and that's why I asked the question. So, if you have a product where you've always demonstrated it in person, and now you can't get to be in person with your prospect, or it doesn't really lend itself to being demoed very well virtually, then what's the strategy? What's working?
Yeah, so it's really hard to replicate the connection that you're having you can have with a customer in person. If you're over Zoom or over the phone, these internet interactions can be clunky, they can be awkward, whereas in-person meetings can give salespeople the opportunity to really connect and really understand. It's harder to gauge objections, it's harder to create long-lasting relationships. In terms of how to go about it, I think you need to kind of get over. You need to be able to bridge the gap to be able to understand what the organization that you're selling into needs, and kind of understand what their decision making process looks like in this new world, right?
Sure.
I think that one key thing you can do there is focus on the people that can really help you out within an organization. Your sponsor, the person who already wants to bring you in, thinks your thing is a great idea. You have to have them be your eyes and ears within the organization, because they can better kind of speak with all the people, understand who all is influencing the decision, and that's the way to be successful, is because you lose a lot of your weapons as a field salesperson if you're not actually in the field.
Sure.
And so the way to get them back is to leverage that sponsor, and to have that sponsor kind of have the conversations with all the decision makers for you, report back to you, give you that information so that you can proactively address their concerns, which may not come up because they may not join the Zoom, or they maybe aren't even paying attention, right? And it's maybe they're doing their emails at the same time. And so it's important that you have someone kind of guide the deal from the inside. You have to win deals, you need someone on the inside who really, really wants it and
Let me
can
ask you
help
this.
you do your job.
I agree. I've always been espoused the importance of relationships with someone who's going to championship the sale for you. You call them a sponsor. I like that term. So this is great, where you've already established relationships with existing sponsors, so to speak. What should somebody do right now where they don't yet have those relationships? What can they do to develop these relationships with potential sponsors?
Well, I think that's really important, right? And everyone's talking about empathy right now, and I think that's kind of obvious at this point. But the good news is everybody's got one more thing in common. I think that it's harder to develop these relationships over a when you're not in person. So you have to just try harder at it. You have to, you know, the good thing about a sponsor is that they want you to win. They are, when I think of a sponsor, the person who within the organization that really already wants this thing in there, and they're often the reason you're talking to the place in the first place. Maybe they called you, or maybe they really reacted positively when you were doing lead gen with them. But I think, the keys to relationship building are always the same as they always were. Listening and being useful, creating value. But it's just harder because you can't take them out for beers, and you can't, it is a little more challenging to become friends with someone at this point the way you could have before.
Yeah, it is more challenging because the way we develop relationships, first of all, in healthcare, the way that people have been developing relationships has changed a lot over the last decade, just because of compliance issues and the like. But now with COVID, it's even a lot more challenging. So, you've been talking about relationships. And it's tough building relationships during these times. I mean, you talked about that. So let me ask you about one of the things that builds relationships, and now thinking strictly more about the business focus and not so much trying to be buddies with somebody, because in healthcare, that's sort of a rarity these days as well. Since COVID, we know that the customer's needs have changed. So it seems like sales messaging, what salespeople are saying, needs to change as well. What are your thoughts about that? And if you feel that the messaging needs to change, how so? How does the messaging need to change in order to resonate more with the prospects in a crisis environment? You have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think in a down economy, you often need to change your messaging from "will help you do better," which is what you see everywhere in messaging, right? It's often kind of, we'll help you do better. And that's fine in a good economy, right? But I think you need to change it to something more along the line of, we'll help you do more with less. So, and then I think once you've showed them that, you want to show them how much more, how you'll help them do more with less, meaning how much more in terms of dollars, or in terms of manpower, in terms of resources, whatever it is. I'll use us as an example, right? So when times were good, in a good economy 9 months ago, right? My sales team at Badger, they would say, "We'll help you sell 20% more with your field sales team." And so basically, basic class. That's classic kind of "we'll help you do better" messaging. And now, this is probably 6 months ago now, I talked to my sales team and I was like, we've got to tweak what we're going to market with. Instead, we should be saying, with Badger Maps, your outside sales team can generate the same revenue, even though now your team is 20% smaller. And there's a huge difference between those two things, even though they say basically the same thing, but the positioning, the messaging is slightly different. And one of the messages resonates way, way more with customers in a down economy.
No, it makes sense. When you're talking about what's specifically impacting them now, your messaging becomes relevant. So being able to do more with less, and especially the way you articulated it, Steve, is that you can't just say we're going to do more with less. You have to be able to show them, be very, very specific. Less staffing, less resources. You have to identify what the resources are. So that is great. That is great. So if sales reps, they're always told to focus on metrics. Activities, number of calls they're making, number of callbacks they're getting, et cetera. So if sales reps should focus on metrics, should they focus on different metrics right now? In other words, should the KPIs that sales managers use to measure sales representatives, should they be changing right now as well?
Yeah, I think we could rethink that right now. I think the most important metric is always revenue or profitability, whatever for a sales rep, whatever your comp plan comps you on, that's the most important metric. And as a company, you always want to comp people on what's most important to the company, right?
Right.
But I'd recommend that reps and companies not only focus on revenue or profit right now, because these are lagging metrics, meaning they measure the work that we've been doing in the past. So it's important in downtimes, especially, I think, to look at forward-looking metrics like qualified leads or pipeline or proposals given. The CFO or the leadership team might really have a lot of pressure right now to just focus on revenue because cash is king right now. But as a rep, it's your responsibility to focus on building pipe and generating revenue in the future too. So if you're having trouble pipeline building, you need to keep your eye on lead gen numbers and like meetings and scheduled qualified new deals. If the challenges are more mid funnel, then you need to focus on things like number of presentations or proposals to decision makers. If you're having trouble closing, you could look at negotiation type metrics like discounting, like what discounts do we have to give to close the deal.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So let me ask you, you run a sales force. And right now, one of the big challenges, again, is in healthcare anyway, is that salespeople don't have the same level of access to stakeholders as they did in the past. So, one metric is how many people am I talking to? But what would you tell your sales team if they were having, and I don't know if they are having difficulty accessing people, but assuming they are, what do you tell them to focus on? What do you tell them that they should be doing every day? What metrics should they be focused on to see if they're moving the needle in the right direction?
Well, we used to focus most on revenue,
Right.
And now we're a lot more focused on number of new meetings with qualified buyers, which we also we're looking at before, just as kind of a forward looking metric, but I think now we care about it even more because that we're worried less about the next 2 months in performance and worried more about the next year in performance right now. And that's kind of generally what I would encourage a lot of people to do. I is focus on the future. I think there's it's not a great time in terms of you're not going to get great performance now, but
Right.
you can if you do things that'll maximize performance over the next year. You might be a lot more successful than if you just focus on the next month or two, which, a lot of times in sales, we do tend to focus on the next quarter or the next month. But I use a bowling analogy with my team here. So, usually as a sales rep, you're setting up 10 bowling pins every month, and then
Right.
you're rolling the ball and seeing what you can knock down for the month, right? But not being able to go out into the field, for example, or the economy might be a real impediment towards getting to roll the ball well, right? So instead, if you focus on just setting up more pins and kind of metric that as one of your key metrics of success, maybe you can set up 100 pins and just kind of get them all set up. And then when the economy kind of comes back online, like maybe you sell a med device like a laser or something, and doctors' revenues are down, and so they're not buying nearly as many lasers right now. But if you can show a whole bunch of doctors the lasers and explain why it's a good idea, and then when things come back online, sell a whole bunch of lasers at once. So maybe you can set up 100 pins, and then next April you'll get to or next August or whenever things kind of pop open a bit more, you'll be able to roll the ball through all the pens once the world's back
Sure,
online.
sure.
So,
And that sounds especially important for capital equipment salespeople who very frequently have to be looking 1, 2, or more years down the road anyway. Now is a great time.
mhm.
Are you finding, I think you alluded to this when I asked the first question about if there was any good news, but generally speaking, you mentioned that you're finding that people, prospects, are more open to having conversations on the phone or maybe Zoom calls.
Mhm.
Do you think that that has impacted sales in a positive way during this time? Has it given people access to people who they would not have had otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I would recommend everyone try this. Like, go through your CRM or wherever you keep your data, and you know, pull up 100 people that you don't think you can get a hold of or don't think you can
Yeah.
get in front of, and just try giving them a call right now and see what happens. I think people are being surprised with how approachable the world is right now, and I think it's because, I mean, I people are just sitting in their bedrooms and stuff a lot of the
Yes.
times, and so they're willing to talk because they're. I think if it's that is a clear shift that's occurred, and so I would recommend everyone do that. Like, pull up the list of the 100 people that you've never been able to get a hold of, but you'd love to, and try that list one more time.
Yeah, great advice. And I love your analogy. This is a great time to be setting up those bowling pins, so you'll have a great opportunity to roll the ball at them down the road. I have a question about inside changes. I always say salespeople have two customers. You have your outside customers; those are the ones who you are actually trying to get to buy your product. But then you have your inside customers. Those are the ones in the company. Your manager, the support staff. And with inside changes specifically, sales managers and sales representatives have suddenly become part of a remote sales team, whether they like it or not. So,
Hmm.
how do interactions between sales leaders and sales representatives need to change? And maybe more specifically, how can sales leaders be better managers, and how can sales representatives be better team players remotely?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'd say, it is very different to manage a remote team than one where you can go on ride-alongs with them and see them in the office, etc. So I think this is a really hard time to be a sales leader. Not to mention that an economic crisis is a horrible time to be a sales leader, because the whole company depends on the revenue that your team produces to survive. So, sales leaders need to be truly great in a time of crisis, I think.
How do you keep salespeople
Um,
motivated during these difficult times?
so yeah, I think you have to be responsive. You have to be supportive of your reps, and remember, your team is probably scared. They're worried about losing their job. They're worried about how hard it's going to be to get another job. They're concerned about how their commission check has evaporated. And remember, your sales reps weren't paying their mortgage with their base, right? So,
Right.
you gotta. I think you got to keep them motivated by giving them regular coaching. I think it's important to not go silent, which is really easy
Yeah.
in the remote world. It's easy to slide into silence, and instead you have to proactively be getting in front of your reps and talking to them and finding out from them what they need to be more successful, and figure out who on the team is having success right now, and um, with what type of customer profile are they having success, and what's the playbook that they use to have that success. And then once you find that rep that's cracked the success code, work with them to train the rest of the team on that, so that you can replicate that success. And I think
Yeah.
I mean, because success is ultimately all that's motivating, right? Like, that's the ultimate motivator, is what people, they want to be successful in their sales job. And it's really hard to be motivated if you're not doing well and the company's not doing well. And so I think you have to keep showing the path towards success, and showing who is attaining it and how they're doing it. A great sales leader, you have to understand what's going on at the ground level, um, and and that understanding of what's going on allows you to steer the ship, and keep people motivated.
Let me ask you this, Steve. You talked about what I think great leaders are doing. They're reaching out to their sales teams. They're communicating with them on a regular basis. I hear from a lot of salespeople who've heard a minimal amount of communication from their management, and they're saying things like, "Well, numbers are down, so get out there and sell." That's about the
Mm-hmm.
sales message
Mm-hmm.
they're getting. So, a lot of salespeople who are out there feel like they're alone, and they're even asking questions like, am I going to have a job you mentioned that. Am I going to have a job
Mm-hmm.
a month from now, next quarter, next year? So for salespeople who feel like they're living in the dark, no one's communicating with them in terms of providing the information that they would like to hear. What would you recommend these salespeople do? You're a sales leader. You run a company. What would you want your sales team to do if you weren't speaking to them?
Um, I think I think I'd want them to reach out to me and let me know that let me know what their concerns are. Let me know, and I think this is an important time to keep the lines of communication open. People's imaginations, they get the best of them, right? They,
Sure.
especially in a large group, and gossip of impending doom is very powerful. It
Yes.
travels quickly, right?
Hmm.
You can get morale problems. You can get rash decision making. Um, I think as a leader of a sales team or any team, really, you need to communicate more in these times, and it needs to be in a transparent way, a realistic way, and an optimistic way. You need to give your team an action plan that that will put their fears to rest, so that they can focus on selling. Right?
Yeah, do you
Uh,
think though that a lot of managers or sales leaders don't really know what those fears are? For example, with business being down, with numbers being down, everyone's worried about their job. And a lot of salespeople are very reluctant to vocalize their true feelings towards sales leadership because they don't want to look weak or they don't want to look overly concerned. So, what would you suggest again to these salespeople who feel like they're not getting the information from management that they need to get? And to tell them to reach out or keep the lines of communication open is one thing, but if the lines of communication aren't coming from management, how can the salespeople appropriately, without overstepping the boundaries, approach
mm-hmm.
their managers, their distributors, maybe the VP of sales in the company to say, hey, you know what? I'm not comfortable with what's going on here. These are my concerns. What can you tell me? Now that's what they want to know, but how can they articulate that? How would you be comfortable having your sales team articulate that to you without, without feeling like you're being pushed beyond reason?
Yeah, and I get it, right? I think empathy is king here, both ways, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the sales reps have to look to their managers with empathy, and the sales leadership needs to look to their sales reps with empathy and really understand the perspectives they're coming from. And I love the question, because it's, a lot of people aren't doing a good job of leadership right now, right? I mean, I think the so if you are in a situation where your leadership team is not communicating well, and maybe they're doing it on purpose, right? Maybe they're keeping people in the dark because the news is real bad, right? And they're just, and so
Or
they
they just
just.
don't know. The news might
Mm-hmm.
necessarily be bad moving forward, but they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know
Yeah.
what to say. But yet, if you're a salesperson, you want to hear something, because otherwise you feel
Mm-hmm.
you're not getting together with your colleagues anymore. I mean, in a lot of situations, you're not having the weekly or the monthly sales meeting unless you're doing it virtually, and hopefully they're doing that. But without
Mm-hmm.
these lines of communication, it just seems like it's a very big challenge.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. And I think there's not an it's not an easy there's not no easy way to do this, because you can't make your sales leadership team great. But what one thing you could do is, if you do figure something out that is working, you can take that thing that is working, um, that playbook, or like, that, hey, I figured out this new type of ideal customer that is buying right now, or people that this messaging really worked. Whatever the thing is, wherever you can find something that works or is successful, you can bring that to management and offer to do a write up that you give out to the rest of the team of, hey, here's an idea of how we can all sell more right now. It's usually we sell to with this messaging, but if we change it like this right now, it really resonates, that sort of thing.
I think
But
that's important. Very, very often salespeople in the medical industry, they'll figure out something that works. And there is a reluctance to share it with the rest of the sales team because, of course, everybody wants to be the star on their team. But during this time of crisis, if you know something that's working, go out and share it with your colleagues because what goes around comes around. So I think
mhm.
that's really great advice, Steve. We all need to be a little bit more generous during these times. Let me ask you a question. A thought just popped into my mind. Because I'm a fan of Badger Maps, it's a tool that I can't imagine anybody being without when they're out in the field selling. Whether you just sell in a 5 mile radius or you're selling across the country. So, can you give me any ideas how people are using your software where they're selling virtually right now, or
Yeah, I
blended?
mean,
Blended, I should say, where they're doing
yeah.
both, selling live and they're selling virtually. So, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of people are selling blended right now, most people are selling blended to some degree already. Like when you capture we call it a check-in, where you capture information about a meeting or an interaction with a customer. Those have been those often have been remote meetings for a long time, but the percentage has shifted to more remote meetings. So we've seen the percentage shift to more remote meetings, and we've seen companies' effectiveness and sales numbers drop a bit during these times. So, um, depending on the industry,
Yeah.
some industries have dropped to zero, and some industries have gone up. I mean, if you sell Zoom software, you're doing great right now, right?
Yeah, yeah. So Badger is a good tracking tool as well. Whether you're selling live or virtually, it's not just
Hmm.
being more efficient and
Yeah.
streamlining your appointments when you're out there, but it also helps you to more or less maintain a record or control of how you're spending your time.
Well, we've got tools to help people focus on the right customers, and it doesn't matter really if you're going to meet with them or not. In general, people use it for, I'm going to be in this area.
Yeah.
I'm driving out to Springfield. So who out there should I be focused on? So we help surface who the most important people are to spend time with, to focus on. And you can take that and then go and meet them in person, or you can take that and call them on the phone, or take that and try to set up a Zoom meeting with them. I mean, it all works. So, but that helping the tools to help people focus on the most important customers, and the customers that are most likely to actually convert into a sale.
I love that. I love
That
that.
that's really useful right now, whether you're meeting people in person or not.
Yeah, one of the things that I teach during time and territory management programs is that you have to know who your most valuable customers are. And there's a hierarchy of your customers. There certainly are those customers who deserve more attention, who are at the higher end than those at the lower end. But a big challenge that a lot of reps have is being able to maintain some sort of control with that. And what you just delineated really helps them to do that, whether they're calling live or calling virtually. So that's important. I just have a couple of more questions. And the economy has changed the landscape for a lot of businesses. What are some strategies that sales managers and sales representatives can use right now to build the new skills needed to succeed in this environment? In other words, what skills are you seeing that are making a difference?
Well, I think there's definitely coaching right now, and developing your skills is probably, it's more important right now than ever, right? Because any time of change or a time of adjustment, you need to spend more time coaching, more time sharpening your skills as a sales rep. I think that sales managers should be spending 50% of their time on some element of coaching and training. And, I don't mean 50% of their time teaching class or anything, but I mean pre-call strategizing, post-call debriefing, joint calls, ride-alongs, opportunity specific coaching. Anything that makes the reps and the team better counts towards that 50% rule of thumb. In terms of what skills sales reps really, really need right now, I think anyone would benefit from brushing up on their negotiation skills. specifically anything around how to defend margins and sell the value of what your product does is something that every team could probably freshen up on. I think building pipeline, but so grow.
Prospecting.
We all need to relearn how to prospect right now and rethink who we're selling to in this economy, because sometimes the best buyer for our service has shifted a little bit. I think that those two skills, so building pipeline and negotiation skills, are probably the two things that I would tell any company or any sales rep to brush up on first right now for these changes.
Building pipeline and negotiation skills that you need now and skills you will definitely need going into the future. So yeah. Steve, I've got one more question. Mm-hmm. And that has to do with trends. One of the questions I get asked a lot. People email me. They go, Mace, where do you see the healthcare sales space going? Should I stay here? Should I look to sell in some other industry? So, what trends do you see happening, generally speaking, in field sales over time in a post-COVID world? What's the future going to look like, Steve?
I think that field sales will be just as big as it ever was.
Why?
It really hasn't changed that much in a lot of cases. So we're seeing. We initially saw about a 30% drop in companies like doing field sales activities, but a lot of that has come back, and then now we're actually seeing things are growing again for us, right? So people are
things growing right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's an important question because as we're recording this, it's almost Thanksgiving. It's November 2020, and I'm giving that date for a reason, to put it into context in case someone is listening to this later. But you were talking about an initial 30% drop when COVID started. So right now, COVID is at the worst in the United States it's been since the whole thing began. A lot of the case curves, number of infections are heading up exponentially. So what are you seeing in terms of activity? Is it changing now, or is it sort of holding or going up or down? What are you seeing?
I haven't seen anything change in the last couple weeks. I should actually check with the team to see if there's any reactions, because there's new lockdowns, but like the lockdowns are around like, okay, well, no restaurants after, like they just closed restaurants in California, right? Like that will have an impact on our customers that sell stuff to restaurants, obviously, right? It's only for 3 weeks, so you wouldn't shut your. That's probably 3 weeks. It's not going to bankrupt most businesses, but it's real bad, right?
But the salespeople who sell to restaurants aren't. I mean, some restaurants are going to fail, and that is tragic. And we wish that wouldn't happen. But most restaurants, I hope, are going to stay in business. So their needs for goods, supplies, and services that they get from salespeople will continue. Isn't that true?
I think so. Yeah, I think that once we have a vaccine for this, and we've had enough time to roll it out, life basically goes back to normal in terms of field sales. Like the companies that were best off going to market with a field sales team will still be best off going to market with a field sales team. And after the world's been vaccinated, there's no reason not to. So if going to market with a retail store was better for you beforehand, or if going to market selling over the internet was better for you beforehand, you already wouldn't be selling with a field sales team. You'd be doing one of those things. If inside sales was better for you, you would already be doing that.
So Steve, we talked about some things that people can be doing, must be doing, in fact, if they're in sales right now. You talked about setting up the pins for later on, talked about staying in touch with their sponsors. There's lots to be done right now, and I really see it as an opportunity in terms of time to do these things, where salespeople are frequently trying to find time for prospecting and making these connections. So there's lots of great opportunities. I agree with you. Field sales is very much alive. It's not dead. It's not dying. We're just going through a time of change right now. So Steve, one last thing. where can people find out more about, first of all, your podcast and Badger Maps?
Sure. So my podcast is Outside Sales Talk, and it's for outside salespeople. So it's on every podcast platform.
Okay.
But yeah, there's some great stuff on there for sure.
And what about
But
Badger Maps? Where can we find out about that?
The best place to find out about Badger Maps really is just the website. So go to badgermapping.com. And if you're interested in if you're in field sales and you want to know what it does, go check it out and just mention this podcast and Mace and to the sales reps on my side, and they'll give you 2 months free to kick around Badger and make sure it works for you, so you can really check it out.
Yeah, and I strongly encourage people to do that. Now is a great time to familiarize yourself with Badger software that can make your life so easier when you're moving forward. And by the way, folks, I'm currently not an affiliate with Badger. I'm not being paid to say this. I wanted to interview Steve because I just believe in the power of what his product can do to help you be a better salesperson. So, Steve Benson, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today. And I hope people will check out your podcast as well. And this is Mace Haroff for the Medical Sales Guru podcast and the Medical Sales channel on YouTube. Hope you've enjoyed the interview with Steve Benson. And if you have any questions for either me or Steve, you could just send them to mace@medicalsalestraining.com. And we hope to see you again on the next episode. Until then, don't forget that no one is more important in your world than the patient. The patient always comes first. I'll talk to you again soon next time. Bye for now.